6 a.m. January 1945, somewhere along the Siegfried Line, Western Germany. Private First Class Melvin Young, combat medic, 94th Infantry Division, has been crawling through frozen mud for the last 40 minutes. The men in his unit are spread out across a narrow stretch of open ground between two tree lines, moving carefully, watching their footing, because everyone in the 94th by this point knows what the Germans have buried in the dirt ahead of them. And then, the man 8 feet to Melvin's left stops moving. He has the locked, rigid stop of someone who has just pressed his boot down on 3 metal prongs that belonged to a weapon called a bouncing Betty. Next, he heard a clicking sound that every soldier in Western Europe has been trained to fear. In the next 4 seconds, the ground next to that soldier is about to send 360 steel ball bearings through everything standing within 20 meters, and Melvin Young is standing well within 20 meters. What happens next is something Melvin will spend the rest of his life trying to forget. Melvin Young enlisted as a combat medic and was assigned to the 94th Infantry Division, one of the American units that fought through northern France and into Germany under General George Patton's Third Army. Medics in the 94th were not rear echelon personnel. They moved with the infantry, crossed the same ground, faced the same fire, and carried no weapons beyond a sidearm, just medical bags, morphine, and a red cross on their helmets that German soldiers were supposed to respect. By the time the 94th reached the Siegfried Line in early 1945, Melvin had already seen enough of the war to understand what S-mine casualties look like from the outside. Treating them was a different education entirely. You could patch a bullet wound in the field. You could tourniquet a leg and give a man a fighting chance of reaching a hospital alive. S-mine wounds didn't work that way, and every medic who had worked them knew it. The men who took ball bearings to the stomach didn't die quickly. They died over hours, sometimes days, and the best a medic could often do was sit beside them, administer morphine, and make the time as bearable as possible. Melvin understood all of this before he stepped into that field. The S-mine, shrapnel mine in German, entered production in 1935. A full 9 years before Allied boots ever touched Normandy sand. American infantrymen had another name for it, the bouncing Betty. The British called it the deboliker. Some soldiers just called it the castrator. The names tell you everything you need to know about what it did to the men who stepped on it. By the end of the war, German factories had produced nearly 2 million of them. What separated the S-mine from every other anti-personnel mine in use during the war was its 2-stage mechanism. A standard pressure mine detonates in the ground. You step on it, it explodes, and the blast is partially absorbed by the earth. When a soldier's boot pressed down on the 3 metal prongs at the top of the device, a propelling charge fired immediately, launching the steel canister straight up out of the ground. It rose to roughly 3 feet, waist height on an average soldier, in 3 to 4 seconds. Then the main charge detonated, releasing 360 steel ball bearings in a complete 360-degree horizontal ring at over 1,000 feet per second. The effective kill radius stretched 20 meters in every direction. Injuries were documented at up to 140 meters. Lieutenant Colonel C.E.E. Sloan, who authored the military study Mine Warfare on Land, described the S-mine as probably the most feared device encountered by Allied troops in the entire war. The most psychologically devastating feature of the S-mine was not the explosion itself. Veterans said this in interview after interview, and Melvin Young's account was no different. The click was worse than the blast because the click gave you time to know exactly what was coming. Between the moment those prongs compressed and the moment the canister left the ground, there was a window of 3 to 4 seconds. Training manuals told soldiers to drop flat immediately. The theory was that shrapnel spreading horizontally at waist height would pass over a prone body. What the manuals couldn't account for was the physiological freeze response, the 1 to 2 seconds where the body simply locks up before the brain can issue any instructions at all. That left maybe 2 seconds to identify the correct action and execute a controlled drop into a minefield where landing wrong could trigger a second device. Even those who dropped perfectly still took shrapnel because the blast spread downward and upward as well as outward. For the soldiers nearest to the man who triggered it, not the ones standing on it, but the ones within striking distance, the situation was different in a way that didn't get easier with experience. Running meant crossing more unknown ground. Dropping flat meant hoping the earth beneath you was clear. Standing still meant absorbing the full blast at waist height. None of the options were good. Most men, Melvin included, described not consciously deciding anything at all. When the canister detonated beside the soldier 8 feet to Melvin's left, the ball bearings moved faster than sound across the open ground. Melvin, flat in the mud, felt the blast pass over him. The man who triggered the mine did not go down immediately. S-mine victims rarely did, which was part of what made them so hard to treat. The wound pattern was internal, and the bleeding was internal. Melvin's job in that moment was to cross the same ground he had just survived, reach the casualty, and do something useful. What he found when he reached the soldier was consistent with what S-mine wounds produced. Young had no operating room, but he had a medical bag and whatever calm he could manufacture while lying in a frozen field that might have more mines in every direction. Femoral artery wounds were the other major killer, and they moved faster than abdominal wounds. A severed femoral artery could bleed a man out in under 2 minutes. A tourniquet applied within the first 60 seconds could sometimes save a man with a femoral hit. In the chaos following an S-mine detonation, with multiple men down and no one certain of the ground beneath their feet, that 60-second window was almost never met cleanly. Melvin later described treating S-mine casualties as some of the hardest work he did in the war because of the gap between what the men needed and what he could actually provide. The injuries required immediate surgery, blood transfusions, and multiple operations. What he could offer in the field was stabilization, pain management, and presence. For the worst casualties, presence was all there was. Melvin Young survived the war. He came home, and for years afterward he gave interviews about what he had seen and done as a medic with the 94th Infantry Division.